I want to share a devotional thought right now entitled Search Me. And what provoked my heart to even consider this thought was not about anybody else. It was primarily about me and trying to make sure that my heart is in the right place. Of course, this is a really tough season for America, but particularly for Black America. And not only are individuals having to deal with, um, the racial injustices, dealing with the coronavirus, and but on top of that, they could be dealing with personal struggles as well. I've known some people who have lost loved ones during this particular season, and dealing with financial struggles. So, anytime you're under a lot of stress in life, or in experience any kind of trauma, of course, your emotions are on 10, right? And so, what I started paying attention to was myself initially. And of course, I'm seeing how my brothers and sisters are responding in this particular season. And so, my heart was heavy because it is definitely difficult to keep your thoughts and your emotions in the right place. But as children of God, we're not exempt from that struggle. And I myself, experiencing sleepless nights, um, and knowing that my brothers and sisters are experiencing the same things, because of the trauma that we've had to witness and some people have had to experience. But my concern was that, as we move forward, trying to accomplish great things, trying to um, um, make progress, that we don't just make progress, but we move forward with hearts that actually please God. And so, in my own personal studies, I was actually studying, reading through the story of Moses. Just kept um, drawing my attention. And actually, it confirmed my concerns. And as I studied it, God gave me some insight that gave me direction, gave me hope, gave me correction and admonishment all at the same time. So when I considered Moses, the thought about Moses is I don't want to fight to get to a promised land, and find myself disqualified because I am on the journey of fighting a good cause, or I have an honorable fight, but I have a dishonorable heart. And so when I considered Moses, specifically in Numbers chapter 20, and I know we're probably familiar with the story, but in Moses chapter 20, uh, it says in verse 1, in the first month of the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin. And so here they didn't have any water, right? And so the Bible says in verse 2 that the community of people actually gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. And so Moses and Aaron were just frustrated. So the Bible says that they went out from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and it said that they fell face down, right? And of course, the God appeared to them and gave them instructions, told Moses to take the staff and go out, assemble the people at this rock, and then out of this rock, I want you to speak to the rock, and out of this rock, I want you to, the water will flow, right? And everybody will be able to drink, even the animals, right? But in that moment, Moses, instead of speaking to the rock as God has instructed him, the Bible says that he struck the rock twice, right? But the particular verse that really, really got my attention and that really spoke to where I felt like I was the direction that I was going in, as well as what I'm witnessing with a lot of children of God in this particular season, was verse specifically Numbers chapter 20, verse 12. It says, "But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give you." So here it is, Moses, all this effort, going back and forth in the presence of Pharaoh, on this journey, en route to this destination, right? He fought so hard to get to this point, and now he finds himself disqualified. But the Bible says specifically that God said, I will not bring you to this place because you didn't trust me and you did not honor me as holy, right? So it wasn't because Moses didn't want to go to the promised land that he was disqualified. It wasn't because he just got fed up and tired of the people complaining and murmuring all the time that he just threw his hands up and says, I'm out of here. It wasn't because he was he fell dead on the journey, right? It wasn't because anybody was holding him back. The Bible said, God said specifically that you did not honor me in the sight of the Israelites, and you did not trust me, right? Now, God didn't. Now, the one thing that's really interesting about that is that he didn't say that you didn't honor me in the presence of your enemies or the Israelites. I mean, the Egyptians or anything like that. He says you didn't honor me in the presence of the Israelites. Fellow followers of God, you did not honor me, right? So I'm looking at Moses, right? Moses is very much as human as I am, right? So I'm looking at Moses. Is Moses could fall short with a staff in his hand, right? If Moses could fall short with a leader, a fellow leader right by his side, right? If Moses could fall short taking his concern and his issue to God, because it says they fell down, face down, right? If Moses could be fall short doing what God said by gathering the people right in front of the rock, right? I'm looking at Moses, I'm like, wow, if Moses can fall short, I could fall short too, right? So Moses had an honorable mission, right? But it's somewhere along the way. I don't know if it was right in that moment, under the pressure of the moment, or if it was something that had been brewing in his heart and his mind. But in that moment, Moses had an honorable mission, but in that moment, he had a dishonorable heart, right? So God told Moses that he didn't trust him and that he did not honor him, right? But, when I consider how this scene actually looked, he didn't dishonor or lack trust in God the way I probably would have imagined him to, right? I mean, he didn't have this open rebelliousness and just like chunk God to deuces or anything like that, right? He didn't abandon his mission. He was still right there. So I'm looking at Moses as human, right? And I'm looking at him under the pressure in a journey, right? And I'm considering myself, I'm human. I'm under the pressure in my own journey, right? So Moses dishonored God according to God's words, and he did not trust him, right? And I'm looking, I said, well, if Moses didn't dishonor or lack trust in God the way I felt like, it probably would have manifested, then maybe I could too, right? So I could actually dishonor God with a staff in my hand, meaning that I could dishonor God with tools that he actually gives me to do what he tells me to do. I could dishonor God with a staff in my hand, with being fully equipped to do the works of God, right? I could dishonor God, and I could not trust him that way. I can dishonor God with like-minded saints right by my side. Moses had Aaron right by his side. That was his fellow leader, right? I can dishonor God, and I can lack trust with brothers and sisters right by my side. I can even lack God falling face down in the presence of the Lord. Moses did. The Bible says he lacked trust, and he dishonored God, right? So I can't just focus on the fact that now if I'm in that assembly, right, I can't just look at Moses, because really in I's view, Moses didn't do anything wrong, because if I was in that group, I would have been like, well, good for Moses. He did something right, because as a result of what he did, we all got to drink water, right? Even Moses benefited from it, right? But the Bible specifically said that he only did part of what God had told him to do. He took the staff with him, check. He assembled the people before the rock, check. But when God told him to speak to the rock, he did not do that, right? It said that he struck the rock after he chastised the assembly, right? And so I can't, if I'm part of that group, yeah, I'm high-fiving Moses and I'm affirming him because we all got to drink, right? We all got to drink. But God was not pleased in this moment, right? So I'm looking at Moses, of course, again, he's just as much human as I am. And I'm like, my journey might not necessarily look like Moses's, but my heart could, right? Here I am. I have a staff. I'm in the assembly of I'm assembling with the people at the rock, right? What else was it? I'm falling face down to God, dealing with the pressures of this journey, right? I'm dealing with that, but my journey might not look like Moses's, but my heart, what God sees in that moment for Moses, could be very much like mine. So not only am I praying about the things that are going on around me, right? But I have to be intentional about praying about the things that are going on the inside of me, right? Because as well-meaning as I could be, I could find myself on a good day, right? On a good day, I know that the enemy is actually laying in wait, waiting for an opportunity, right, to exploit and to attack my weaknesses in my flesh, right? That's exactly how he does. He lays in wait, right? So I can have a good day today, but later on today it could be a different story, because when you think about Jesus, when he had been fasting in the wilderness for 40 days, right? And he came out of the wilderness and he was hungry, right? And the Bible says that the devil, right, started to try to tempt him, tempted him 3 times. Of course, he couldn't get him because Jesus was giving him the word, right? But the Bible says after he could not get Jesus, it says he left and he would return at a more opportune time. So it's the same thing with us, right? The enemy will come back, right? I had a good day today, but I have to stay on guard because the enemy is always going to come back for an opportune time, right? So here I am on this journey, much like Moses, right? So I can be on an honorable mission, right? I could be making some good honorable decisions, some good honorable moves to make progress, right? And out of nowhere, out of frustration, out of anger, out of fear, out of hopelessness, out of agitation, out of exhaustion, out of anger, whatever it is, that emotional response to the trauma of the stress that you're experiencing, out of nowhere, I could strike the rock instead of speak to the rock, right? And instead of me trusting in God, I could find myself putting more trust in myself, because I don't know if the text necessarily teaches this anywhere, but I believe that one of the reasons why Moses struck the rock instead of spoke to the rock is because God had instructed him to use the staff so much, right? So in so many times before, crossing over the Red Sea and the serpent being turned into the staff and all these things, right? So God constantly told Moses to use the staff, as I operate, right? And so in this moment, I believe that throughout all this time, this journey, that instead of Moses continuing to trust God for his power, somewhere along the line, he started putting more trust in that staff than he actually put in God. And so he didn't even have an open ear, a listening ear for the fresh instructions and guidance of God, because he had gotten so used to doing things the same way, using the staff every time, that he did not continue to pay attention to God. And so instead of him speaking to the rock per God's instructions, he actually struck the rock. And instead of me honoring God, I can start honoring myself by leaving God out of the equation. And so, when you get a little frustrated or a lot frustrated, it's a strong possibility that in our frustrations that we kind of start doing our own thing because we want things to happen, right? So when Moses fell face down to God, he was crying out to God, right? I can see you're asking God to deliver you from this problem, but you did not give ear to hear the instructions of God. So in essence, what you are telling God is that in this moment, God, because I'm crying out to you, because I know I need you to do something for me that I cannot do for myself. In this moment, what I'm asking you to do is be my deliverer, right? I'm asking you to deliver me from this situation that's going on. But because I'm not adhering to your instructions and your guidance, you can be my deliverer, but you cannot be my Lord. Because in this moment, I'm not willing to do what you're telling me to do, right? And Philippians 4:6, it says, be not anxious, right? I know we're familiar with that. But that word anxious in that text specifically means be not distracted or be not pulled in the opposite direction. So whenever we experience the stresses of life, right? We bring all of these things, all of these stressors that we are experiencing, this anger, these frustrations, these feelings of hopelessness, whatever it is, right? We're going to bring all of that stuff to God. And what God is saying is that I will work on those situations and in this season that you're experiencing. I'll work on all of that. But what I need you to do is make sure that you don't allow those things to distract you away from the journey that I have you on, or pull you in the opposite direction of where I'm trying to take you, right? So my prayer is much like David. I call this devotional thought, search me. Because Psalms 139 is what I'm about to read. But the Bible teaches us, and I know we know this, that David was a man after God's own heart, right? But specifically in Acts, when it describes David, God himself testified. It says that I have found David, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do, right? And so I want to have that same type of testimony for myself, right? I want to be a woman that's after God's own heart. I want to be a person that's obedient to God and does everything that God instructs me to do, right? So in Psalms 139 verses 22 and 24, it says, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting, right? So, like I said from the beginning, we're in this season that the majority of us are experiencing higher than normal levels of stress, right? Not only with the racial stuff and the COVID-19, social distancing, financial troubles, other people having other issues. I have a friend that just lost her husband, and that grief is heavy. So it's troubled on every side, right? And so whenever we are emotionally heavy, right, it's very easy for us to become what we actually hate, right? It's really easy for us to do what we don't desire to do, or we don't do what we want to do, right? Romans 7:15, it says, for what I want to do, that's the stuff that I don't do. But the stuff that I don't do, that's the stuff that I want to do. That's actually sin that lives in me, right? So, it's a strong possibility that you got some stuff in you that won't come out unless you're put under a specific level of pressure, right? And I'm not talking about the good stuff. I'm talking about the bad stuff. One of the examples that I used when I talked about this to the sisters earlier was that, of course, we're dealing with all of this racial tension and stuff like that. Now, let me tell you how easy it is to become that which you hate. And it comes so subtly, right? Now, I can see people looting, and I can see people burning buildings and all this kind of stuff. And in and of myself, I'm pretty convicted that I would not do that, right? But in the core of my heart, I've had thoughts in my own frustration, right? In my own degree of I'm tired of all of this, right? Something has to be done. In my own level of desperation for and desiring change, right? I see them doing that, and a part of me which I know God is not pleased with, would say, well, I wouldn't do it, but I'm glad somebody doing it, you know. But the thing about it is, if it's wrong for me, it should be wrong for anybody else. If it's wrong for anybody else, it should be wrong for me, right? And so the Bible says in Isaiah 5:20, it says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. So at this point, I'm like, Lord, please search my heart. Help me, because this is not who I want to be. I don't want to allow the external stresses to cause me to have a contaminated heart, right? Because I don't want to be disqualified like Moses. Moses didn't make it to the promised land, right? But and the reality is, if God had an expectation for his oppressed children in the Bible, he also has an expectation for his oppressed children of today, right? So God has a promised land for us, right? And I want to see it. I want to see that promised land. And I'm not just talking about heaven, of course. I'm talking about any destination, anything that God has purposed me to accomplish in this life. My heart can disqualify me from receiving it. And that's why it's so important for us to not only submit our situations to God, not only to submit our seasons to God, but to submit our hearts to God. Because a lot of times, everything else won't necessarily disqualify you from reaching your promised land. But sometimes your own contaminated heart is what's responsible for you missing out on your blessing, right? In Joshua 5, it says the Israelites had moved about in the wilderness for 40 years, 40 unnecessary years, all these until all the men of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. Right? And then it says, for the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land he had solemnly promised their ancestors, right? And so these individuals had set off to the promised land. Moses had set off to the promised land, but they did not make it. They did not make it. The Bible says that these men of military age, they died off, but it said specifically, because they had not obeyed God, they were not going into the promised land because they were disobedient, right? And it says specifically for Moses, he was not going to lead these people into the promised land, not because he got tired, like I said earlier, but because he did not honor God in the sight of the Israelites, and he did not trust God in that moment. Like I said, I don't know if this was something that had been brewing in his heart or if it was an error in frustration. Nevertheless, the Bible says that Moses did not make it into the promised land, right? So we have to be careful, right? Because God will actually allow us in this life to get to our personal lands without getting to our promised land. Because if you consider that in Numbers chapter 20, everybody still got to drink. Everybody got to drink, even though Moses did not do what he was supposed to do in order to gain access to that blessing. God still allowed them all to drink, cattle and all, right? And so he allowed them a personal blessing, right? But at the end of that, it said that he could not come into the promised land. So we don't want to make the mistake of believing that just because God allows us to make it to our personal lands, meaning that he allows us to accomplish some personal things and get certain places and make accomplishments in this life, that he's going to give us the promised land, because those are two different things, right? So my thing is, I don't want to, if I don't make it to the promised land, I don't want it to be because I stopped trusting God. If I don't make it to the promised land, I don't want it to be because I stopped honoring God, right? Or because I took matters into my own hands. I don't want to be disqualified like that, right? And so every day I have to posture my heart in the presence of God and ask him, God, please search my heart, because there's some stuff in there that's really ugly and really foul that we are not even aware of. And that's why I'm asking God, who knows me better than I know myself, to search me and expose me to myself, because I don't want to get to a point where I'm acquiring everything in my personal land, right? I get everything. I'm drinking from the rock daily, but when it comes time to enter into the promised land, I'm disqualified. And God says, you can't make it in. Whether that's heaven or any other blessing in this life that he has for me. I don't want to be disqualified, right? So I have to continue to submit my heart to God. Submit my heart to God, because it's a strong possibility that I can have an honorable fight and disqualify myself from entering into the promised land because I have a dishonorable heart. And that's what I'm asking God. God, please search my heart. And I think this is something that's extremely important, particularly in this season right now, because a lot of us have allowed the frustrations of the struggle to contaminate our hearts. And I don't want any of my brothers and sisters to be disqualified from our promised land on this side or the other side. And so we all need to be intentional about positioning ourselves at the feet of Jesus and ask God to please search my heart.